So, as we talk about this idea of lying and deception, obviously we also need to have a conversation about what the truth is and what we think the truth is. And boy, we could spend all semester long on a philosophical discussion in terms of how we arrive at the truth. Mark Knapp in the book goes through and has some, I think, a pretty solid idea of how we arrive at truth. And it's not just him. This is kind of a philosophically accepted concept in terms of the criteria that we use to go through and establish or determine truth. Four filters, if you will. One is the truth that we feel. The other one is the truth that we're told, and then we get into the truth that we figure out through reasoning, and then we get into the truth that we observe. Okay, so the affective truth there, the social truth, the truth that we hear from everybody else around us, the truth that we've arrived at through some critical ability, through some level of reasoning, and then the truth that we arrive at some level of observation. And that term in and of itself goes through and indicates that perhaps this is a longer process than what most of us give time for there. So I'm going to take each one of these and break them down a little bit here and get into some, hopefully maybe dispelling a few myths there. And some of these are going to be hard for you to hold on to. Because the irony is that lying and deception only exist in a society that actually values honesty. If the value wasn't there, then lying and deception would be kind of a moot point in that respect. Also, other research has indicated that much like gossiping, lying and deception are survival skills. To go through and to deceive somebody that that water hole is poisoned, so you can keep that water for yourself, or there aren't any antelope here in this area, so you can have more fertile hunting grounds. This is nothing new. It's not an evolution or a de-evolution in terms of mankind and their values or anything that way. It always has been out there, just like gossip. And yet, because of certain theological influences, like the Ten Commandments, for example, thou shalt not lie, we have a real moral tie to the truth. And I'm not going to sit here and say that lying is a good thing, or dishonesty. What I am saying, though, is that if we don't have the ability to... let me put it this way. This might be a little easier to understand. As I work with people training in interrogation, the number one thing I try to get into, which I'm going to get into with you here as well as far as the class goes, is what their own personal truth baseline is. Okay, what do you value? What's important to you? And most of us value things like family, we value life, we value integrity, we value honesty, and so on, right? And that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But it becomes a problem if you are sitting across the table from an individual who is suspect of breaking one of those values, okay? Even suspect of lying, and you feel that liars are all going to go to hell, you are not going to have the objectivity that's needed to go through and determine that when they disclose to you whether or not they're disclosing the truth, because you've already prejudged them, and that prejudgment sets you up to not see the truth objectively in terms of what it is that you're trying to accomplish there within that. I hope that makes some kind of sense there. So let's get into it. The truth, we determine the truth by what we feel, that whole affective thing. And wow, this is pretty powerful, because a lot of us work off of that concept that resonates with me. I feel it in my heart. To use a local social colloquialism, a burning of the bosom kind of thing, right? Something that manifests itself within your thoracic cavity. And that's all fine and good. The problem with that is there's really no evidence to go along with it. Not long ago, the American Psychological Association, actually it's been about 15 years, published a study on the concept of love and what it is that we actually feel when we feel love, especially romantic love, when we fall into romantic love. And you're not going to like their outcome, because really what it boiled down to is this chemical discharge that happens in the brain. That's it. In fact, all emotion, even though we feel it within the center of our being, the feeling is placed there by our brain. So physiologically, neurologically, there's not a whole lot of merit to something that we might go through and say, well, I feel really good about this, or the antithesis to that might be, I've got a bad feeling about this, right? As it goes. We put a lot of stock into that, though, and with that stock, we call it the truth. And there are people who swear, I know that it's true because this is what I feel. And then there's intuition, and I'm fascinated by this concept because I live with one woman in particular, and I've raised 3 women especially who have this incredible gift of intuition. And it's not something necessarily, I guess it could be a combination of both, a feeling that they have as well as a confirmation of that feeling that they have cognitively. It's both affective and cognitive, okay? My spouse has never been wrong with her intuition. And I'm lucky to be married to that. I don't have that, maybe just by virtue of the fact that I'm a guy, but I'm pretty fascinated by that. So we can look at this whole affective thing in terms of how we determine the truth. In terms of feelings, we can go both ways here. I'm here to say we need to be very careful with emotion and how we tie emotion to what we think is true, because we're so easily ready to default to that feeling more than any other of the truth proofs that might be out there as that goes. The second truth is a truth that we're told. The second determination of truth is a truth that we're told, and this is interesting as well. And we're told truths from day one, really. You know, as we start assimilating meaning, as we arrive at a higher consciousness, as we grow up, as we listen to our parents and our teachers, if we listen to ecclesiastical influences as well around us, and we start adopting concepts and ideas, and somebody tells us that the earth was created in 6 days and God rested on the 7th. Well, that's the truth that's not only told to me via the people that are around me, but I read it in I read it in a Bible. It's a canonized book of truth, that, as I believe it, right? So, which I don't. Okay, just to let you know, but I'm just using that as an example. There becomes a societal influence with those truths, because the more people we're surrounded by who believe the same thing, the more apt we are to go through and take that as truth as well. You see the problem with that? We lean on other people. We don't really have our own standpoint. We don't own what we think is true about X, Y, and Z, whatever that concept might be, because we just kind of depend on somebody else. Well, I like them. They seem to be smart. They've done their homework. They're older and wiser than I am, so I'm going to go through and take what they say as the truth. And that's problematic as well, especially as we're trying to go through and determine deception and lying with that. Next is the truth that we use some kind of reasoning to arrive at. And I'm a big proponent of this. I think argumentation and reasoning, critical thinking are critical, pardon the redundancy there, for us to understand what the truth is. The problem with reasoning is there's good reasoning and then there's faulty reasoning. There, for every concept in reasoning, there is an antithesis to how that reasoning can arrive at something valid. It doesn't happen all the time, so we have to be careful in how we decide to look for evidence and follow the trail and get into some kind of critical structure of what that truth might be. Now, we have truths that are out there that are pretty concrete through this concept of reasoning, right? The truth of gravity, for example, or the truth of condensation, or the truth of desalination, or whatever. And these are laws or principles, really. They're not even really big T truths kinds of things. It boils down to science, which, by the way, is what some people might reduce truth by observation to. Observation, we arrive at truth through watching something, carefully studying and seeing what happens. And while that's part of the scientific process, and certainly could be scientific, it deals with probability. And probability doesn't always arrive at a solid, concrete truth either, okay? Now, we can get into all kinds of debate that way. I happen to believe that we are in a climate crisis. And yet there are a lot of people out there who, based on the same type of scientific evidence that's out there, have come to a conclusion that's 180 degrees out of phase as to what I believe is going on. We have all kinds of evidence. We have all kinds of data that go through and support the concept that we're in trouble in terms of climate change. But because of the probability of the data, there's nothing really solid or concrete about that, as much as we all would like that. We don't like uncertainty. We want a big T truth to hang out on our front porch and to always be there when we step outside, to go through and protect us, and to keep all the ideas that we have, that we've worked so hard to cement into our heads, to be good and valid and enduring. And then we have a crisis of faith, or something just traumatic happens and shakes the ground beneath us, and the big T falls off our porch, and we no longer have the luxury of being certain about anything. Well, it's important to understand these ideas, that we arrive by truth by what we feel, that we arrive by truth by what we're told, by societal influences or familial influences, or religious or ecclesiastical influences, that truth arrives through some level of reasoning, or that we can arrive at truth through observation. All four of these are valid, and all four of these have their inherent problems in terms of us arriving at the truth. Now, we could probably invert that and apply that to deception as well, okay? Because certainly it is what we feel, it is what we're told. We do arrive at lying and deception through some level of reasoning in our own minds, and some level of justification. And we could certainly see it also through observation, which it's fascinating to me. So those four main ideas are what I want you to come away with. And we'll probably, for this week, go through and create a discussion post out of that. So watch the video. You're already here. You're already watching it with me. But I'll post up a question or two in terms of a discussion post as we talk about the four approaches to how we determine what truth is. Okay? All right. Look forward to what you post. We'll talk to you later.